Good evening. It's a brand new day. Welcome to our brand new podcast. This is episode 1 of Cinemacast, our weekly pre-recorded podcast brought to you by Arrow Entertainment. Also sponsored by W Energy Drinks. Link down below in the description section for W.GG. If you decide to purchase any of the products, be sure to use coupon code ARROW, WAN, and save 10% off of your product when you purchase online. You are watching our podcast, our new podcast, right here on Arrow Entertainment. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below. We also live stream over on twitch.tv/arrow with a name. We do podcasts over there as well. Our usual podcast is Tune In Live, and then we have our Beyond the Grave podcast, The Other Side, as well. That's making a big comeback here soon. So be sure to subscribe and follow on both platforms for that. You can also find us on Twitter at Big Mike C AWAN as well. For today's first episode of Cinemacast, I want to talk about a movie I just recently watched. This is a movie that came out back in 2001. Today's feature is Session 9. Starring David Caruso. If you've never heard of that name, or you may have heard of the name David Caruso, he was a star on the show CSI Miami, I believe. I believe it was CSI Miami. He was on CSI Miami. He was in a few other movies as well. David Caruso, I wouldn't say I'm really a particular fan of him because let's just say CSI was once binged in our household for so long, and I just got tired of watching it. I got tired of the characters. He was such an annoying character. But in this movie, he almost kind of sort of portrays that persona of Horatio from CSI, but he also does a pretty decent job in this movie with his acting, along with Stephen Gavidan, or Jevidan. I can't pronounce names, I'm sorry. Josh Lucas and Peter Mullen also star in this movie as well. It is distributed from USA Films, but it's also put out there by Universal, from what I understand. Universal also distributed the movie as well, but it's produced by USA Films, October Films, and Scott Productions, but it's mostly distributed by USA Films. This movie currently holds a 66% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, I don't know when it comes to ratings how a lot of you guys see a film. All right, the movie could be a complete stinker, or the movie could be number 1 in the box office. You know, critics praise it high and mighty, 5 out of 5, 4 stars, and it could be something that it could be a hit or miss. You can either like it, love it, or you can hate it and praise it as the garbage as you proclaim it to be. Session 9 isn't really one of those movies where I would say high praise to it, but I wouldn't say it's a complete stinker as well. This is an interesting movie that I went into with, just fully open, with my mindset open. I wasn't expecting a whole lot out of it. This is a movie that I seen trending on Twitter about a week or so ago, and people were posting the poster for Session 9. People were talking about Session 9 on Twitter in different horror forums that I follow, and there was even one guy that said that this was, he doesn't really get genuinely scared, or terrified when it comes to watching horror movies, but he said this was one movie that kind of messed him up for weeks. It was that terrifying for him to watch. And being a big horror movie buff that I am, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go into this movie not quite expecting what this guy's reaction is, because everybody's reaction is different. I grew up on horror movies. I watch horror movies. I've seen a lot of real bad ones. I've seen a lot of real good ones. I've seen ones that kind of would give you nightmares in a sense, but not really nightmares. I sleep through nightmares. I don't wake up in the middle of the night screaming or sweating or anything like that. But I've had movies where it had somewhat of an impact on me in a sense. This is one of those movies that it didn't have an impact on me, but it kind of left a mark there, and for a reason. Okay, so Session 9 is a psychological horror movie. It's psychological horror. It's directed by Brad Anderson and written by Anderson and Steven Gevedon. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. So the film marked a tonal departure for Anderson. Now, what did Anderson direct in terms of his type of movies? He did movies like, what is this? Frankenstein's Planet of Monsters. I've never heard of that. Next Stop, Wonderland, which is an American romantic comedy. Happy Accidents, a American science fiction romantic comedy. He also did, psychological thrillers. He did the movie Trans-Siberian, which is a psychological thriller. Vanishing on 7th Street, American post-apocalyptic thriller. The Call, which is a psychological crime thriller. I believe I heard of that. Stonehurst Asylum is an American Gothic film. I heard of that as well. But some of these movies I have never really watched. He also did direction for some TV shows such as The Wire, The Shield, Fringe. He did an episode of Masters of Horror back in the day. Boardwalk Empire, Alcatraz, and many others up until 2002. So they said this is the departure for Anderson, who previously worked on romantic comedies. That is something, isn't it? For somebody to move from directing romantic comedies and go into the horror, persona, that's kind of like looking at Bob Clark. If you don't know director Bob Clark, back in the 70s, back in the 70s and 80s, he did different genre types of films. Back in the 70s, he did a Christmas horror slasher known as Black Christmas. Now, you may sit there and think, wait a minute, I heard of the name Black Christmas before. That movie just recently came out within the last 10 years. But no. That is a reboot for the modern times, the newer audience. It is a reboot of a classic. Black Christmas has already been rebooted twice. Once back in 2007 or 2008, and then once again within the last 5 years. The first reboot was a decent hit. It didn't really hit the mark for me. It was more of a popcorn film for me. It was your typical 2000s slasher movie. That's back when they were rebooting and remaking movies for the new genre, for the new generation of film, of horror movie fans. Same thing with the one that just came out within the last 5 years. But I'm talking about the original horror Christmas slasher, Black Christmas from the 1970s, done by Bob Clark. And we will do an episode of Cinemacast on that here in the future. You guys will love it. We'll probably do a little bit more toward Christmas time, so we'll remember that. But the direction I'm going is Bob Clark directed this film. It was a good Christmas slasher. And then in the 80s, the early 80s, he did movies such as Porky's, which was a sort of a coming of age or teenage comedy. It was a hard rated R comedy, It felt like a softcore porn movie. But then again, a lot of comedies in the 70s and the 80s, they had some kind of porn theme to them, And Porky's was one of them in a sense. It was about getting this teenager laid, before they graduate high school or something like that. I forgot what the premise was. It's been so long since I watched Porky's. But then, come a couple years later, Bob Clark I can't even speak today. I got a cold and I can't even talk. Bob Clark, there I go again. Let me take a drink of something. Okay. Bob Clark directed a couple years later a classic Christmas comedy movie that we all know and love as A Christmas Story. So we got Bob Clark, whose departure from a horror Christmas slasher classic to a Christmas comedy classic that everybody watches every year on TNT, on TBS. It's 24 hours ran. Then you got a sequel that was made with Daniel Stern, and then, you know, which it was like hit or miss. It's one of those that's forgettable. And then you got another sequel that's a direct sequel to A Christmas Story, and that returns a lot of the old characters from the original movie. Once again, A Christmas Story, we will cover that also in December when Christmas comes. Don't miss that episode. But we're reverting back to Session 9. And like I said, this director, he directed romantic comedies, and this is a departure for him, you know, to direct a psychological horror movie. The production took place on location at the Danvers State Mental Hospital in Danvers, Massachusetts. While not a financial success, Session 9 developed a reputation as a cult film. Now, when it comes to horror movies, when certain movies are turned into cult classics, you know, when you develop that certain audience that find a film that they absolutely love, it turns into a cult classic. You know, you could have the worst horror movies out there, the worst of the worst. Take Troll 2. The worst of the worst. How much more horrible can Troll 2 be? And it's got a cult following to it. People still watch it to this day. It's insane how many people enjoy this movie still and love it. It's the cringiest horror movie out there. But people love these types of movies. They love watching them over and over again, and this is one of those movies. But for me, I feel like it's a one-timer, and there's a lot of movies that are kind of one-timer for me, or there's other movies where I can watch a second time or a third time, and they're usually pretty good. You know, and I could watch them over, like Halloween. I could watch Halloween over and over again and still love it. And I still love it. Now, I'm going to get to the point where I speak of the synopsis of the movie. Now, within this podcast, if you guys have never seen any of these movies that I discuss on each episode, I will do some spoilers. There will be spoilers with these movies, so if you do not want to hear any spoilers, if you want to watch this movie first or skip to the end for my opinion on the movie, feel free to do so. But if you don't care if you don't really care and you say go right into it, feel free to listen to it, and then we're going to get right into this. So, within this movie, there's this character named Gordon Fleming. He is the owner of a asbestos abatement company in Massachusetts. He makes a bid to remove asbestos from the Danvers State Mental Hospital, which is where the movie takes place, of course. He's desperate for money, and he promises to complete the job within 1 week, despite requiring 2 to 3 weeks. Now, this movie, it does have a slow start to it. It starts out pretty slow, and it kind of drags for a little bit. You get the characters involved. They start doing, you know, the job within the hospital. And it took me a little bit to figure out what's going on, because there was some kind of confusion with it when I was watching it. And whenever I watch a good movie, even if it is bad, I try to pay particular attention to detail, to what the character development's doing, to how the surrounding is, to how the setting is going, the plot and everything. I try to pay real close attention to every little detail. And I must have missed that when I first watched it, and I went back and read up on it. It's like, okay, they're removing asbestos. That's what they're doing. I thought maybe they were trying to renovate this humongous mental hospital. And it's big. When you see it on camera, you see different screenshots of the mental hospital on camera, and it's big. And I'm like, how is this group of about 6 or 7 people supposed to renovate this big ass place within a week? But they're sent in to remove asbestos, and they start doing the job. And of course, it does it by like a day by day basis. It starts on Monday, and the guy tells them, you know, I need money. I'm desperate for it. Give me a week. My crew can get the thing done in a week, tops. So that's what they do. And even though the person he meets with, tells him it's like a 2 or 3 week job, and he said, "No, I need this job. We will get it done in a week." So his crew includes the following: Mike, who is a law school dropout who is knowledgeable about the asylum's history. Now, this guy, he's a very interesting character, and we'll talk more about him in a little bit. Phil, who is dealing with his grief over a recent breakup. Phil is the person that's played by David Caruso. And his acting in this movie, it's not top-notch. It's not quite cheesy, not quite cringe. But I guess you could say there's a little bit of the CSI persona in there when he's trying to, to make this character work. Hank, who is a gambling addict. And then you got Gordon's nephew, Jeff, who is a pathological fear of the dark. And this kid, he's not really the comedic, the comic relief of the film. He's not really a comic relief, but he tries to be in a sense. But you feel more for this character as the movie goes on, and you'll find out why here in a little bit. So we got the cast, we got the characters all within this place, this mental asylum. So while they're surveying the job, Gordon, once again, he is the owner of this company, and right from the start is where everything kicks off. And when you're watching a movie, you don't really realize that. Everything kicks off with this one character. And they're surveying the hospital with the person that owns the land, that has has ownership of the land, and he's trying to get everything situated squared away. Gordon hears a disembodied voice that greets him by his name. Now, this is the scene, and of course, as you look at the poster for the movie, you see this chair. It's like a wheelchair that sits in a hallway. He's at the opposite end of the hallway, and he sees his chair. And that's when he hears the voice. And it's kind of hypnotic in a sense. But then, his attention is broken by his partner. But he hears this voice, and he's focused on his chair. That's where everything starts out. So that's where the confusion comes in. He hears it, but then as you're watching the movie progress, things start happening. Things start getting a little more confusing all the way up until the end. And when we get to the end, we will explain that. Just hold that in your foremind. Hold that out front. That this spot right here is where everything begins. That's where it starts. So he hears his voice. The men began their job starting on a Monday, and Mike soon discovers a box. He stumbles into this room, and it's full of boxes with medical records, evidence, supplies, stuff like that. He just happens to walk away from the job, and he's working with the young guy Jeff. He's working with the young guy Jeff, and he tells him, "I need a cigarette break." He's somebody who doesn't want to do any kind of work. This is the guy that is the law school dropout. He knows everything about law. He knows about how to be an attorney, all this stuff. He knows everything about the justice system, but he also knows everything about, or so to say, about this mental asylum. So when he wanders away from the job, he stumbles into this room, and he discovers a box that it contains 9 audio taped sessions that were recorded with a patient by the name of Mary Hobbs, who suffered from dissociative identity disorder, or as you all may know, as multiple personality disorder, split personality disorder, etc. So as Mike discovers this box, he finds this tape player, and he starts out with session 1, and there's a total of 9 sessions, and he listens to them all in order, and this is over a span of about 5 days that they're in here. And each day he begins to listen to the tapes in the ensuing days. In the sessions, it is said that Mary's psychologist attempts to unveil details surrounding a crime that she had committed at her home 2 decades prior. and Mary exhibits numerous personalities who have unique voices and demeanors. And she's doing these voices on tape. You know, different pitches, different tones. There's a voice of a little boy named Billy. There's a voice of a man named Simon who emerges on one of the tapes at one point. And that seems to be where everything starts to turn south for everybody. But we will soon get there, I promise. So, let's see. I forgot where I left. There we go. In the sessions, you know, okay. Meanwhile, Hank discovers a cache of antique silver dollar coins and other valuables from the crematory. Now, Hank, who is the gambling addict, he is the guy that you will learn within the first 20 minutes or so. He is the one who Phil lost his girlfriend to. So his girlfriend ended up leaving him for Hank. So there is some friction between characters Phil and Hank who are on the job. There's no real fighting, but there's bickering back and forth with each other, in which Gordon is able to shoot down right away from him. So anyway, Hank wanders off down the tunnel and he discovers some antique silver dollar coins, which first appear laying on the ground, leading a trail up to a wall where he pulls a brick out and he starts pulling out massive amounts of coins and jewelry and other valuable stuff. And on the other side, he doesn't realize it, but you see a camera pan inside the other room, which is a crematory. So later that night, after the crew's all done, they left out, they went back to their rooms, their motel rooms, or went to the bar or whatever, Hank decides he was going to return to the hospital to retrieve the items, and he discovers a lobotomy pick among them. He pulls it out, he's looking at it, but then he becomes frightened by noises and a shadowy figure, and he's confronted by an unknown assailant. So this is the first part of the movie where it's kind of intense. You almost want to feel for this character, but then you don't. Because in the movie, he's an asshole. He's an asshole in the movie. You already know what's going on, the friction between him and the other character for what had happened. So it's almost like you either feel for him or you can't. It's almost like he's the first to go, And it's always somebody that is, you want to be the first to go, or for some reason they have a reason to be. Yes, he is the first person to go. He is a gambling addict, and his addiction led him to his death. Or so they say. We will get to that here soon. So anyway, Hank fails to show up for work the next day. They all take notice. An additional worker who is recommended by Phil, by the name of Craig McManus, is hired to take his place. Now, this character, Craig, he doesn't show up until Thursday or Friday. Takes him a couple days to show up. Gordon confides in Phil that he slapped his wife, Wendy, after she inadvertently splashed him with boiling water, and then she refused to answer his calls or let him see their infant daughter. Here is where another subplot comes in. Okay, Gordon, the character Gordon, you'll see him in a couple, 2 or 3 different scenes, sitting outside of his girlfriend or his wife's house, and he's sitting in the van watching her come out, pick up their young daughter, take her inside, and then he gets out of the van and he walks to the house with roses, and everything is, there's little pieces that are put together in the movie throughout to put this whole scene together as to what really happened. So there's some friction between him and his wife. He ended up slapping her because she accidentally threw a pot of boiling water onto him, and it pissed him off, and he ended up slapping her. And then he makes it look like throughout the rest of the movie, yes, I fucked up, I made a mistake, and then he even calls her phone, he calls her and asks if they can meet up. if he could come over and apologize, but she always hangs up on him. So he has some demons in the closet himself. So after he confides with Phil that he did this, they're in the stairwell of the hospital. And they're talking about it. So then while they're talking about it, and then Phil goes off and he feels that Gordon is losing it. He feels like he's losing it. He's going delusional. And he confides in another, and confides in, I think it was Mike, the other character. And then Gordon overhears it. But then, something is triggered, something is ticking inside of Gordon's head, but you don't know what. So he wanders off a little bit. But in the meantime, in the stairwell, Jeff witnesses Hank staring out a window wearing sunglasses talking to himself. Now, this is where you see where Hank isn't dead. He is noticed by this young man, Jeff. So it's to say either he sees a ghost of him or he's actually alive and he's just not all there. Hank goes missing. Once Jeff gets everybody in place in the stairwell, they don't believe him. He swears he saw them, so then everybody splits up to search for Hank. Now, Mike, he is compelled to continue listening to these tapes. So he doesn't bother helping them search for Hank. He is still in this room, listening to these sessions, listening to these tapes, and you start learning a little bit more and more about the patient, Mary, and everything that has happened. You start learning, you hear more about her, you hear more from her, you hear more from the voices of Billy, and of course Simon, which comes up here soon. Jeff and Phil descend into the tunnels underneath the hospital, where Phil finds Hank, half nude, muttering to himself. At this point, while everybody is kind of split up, even Jeff, poor Jeff, he is split up from Phil. He ends up going with Phil, but they end up separating. So poor Jeff, he wanders down this hall where you have nothing but lights hanging on the ceiling, and you got all these hazmat suits hanging up. And he wanders down this long hall. Now, while all this is going on, they have this gas-powered generator that's running. Well, runs out of fuel, lights start shutting off. What do you think happens to poor Jeff? Jeff starts running, chasing the lights as they going off behind him. This poor kid who has a severe fear of the dark. Severe fear of the dark, and he's trapped in darkness. And it's almost like he's suffocating in it. He's like having a seizure or something, He does manage to make himself out. He does make it out there alive after all that, after the generator started up. He manages to make himself out of the hospital, though. Mike restores the electricity, and then he goes back into the room, and he's now on session 9, which reveals that one of Mary's malignant personalities, Simon, was responsible for Mary stabbing her little brother and parents to death. So now everything comes into play. Everything is coming together right now. You learn more about this patient who has this split personality of this guy, Simon, and he's the reason for her killing her parents and her brother, which is the reason why she was committed to this hospital to begin with. Phil finds Gordon in Mary's former hospital room, staring at photos of his daughter's baptism, which he had pasted to the wall. While this is happening, Jeff finally emerges from the tunnels, and he is attacked by an unseen assailant at the company van. By which I will say, poor Jeff, this poor kid who has an immense fear of the dark, he doesn't make it. He does end up dying. You don't see him killed off. You don't see who kills him off yet. The following day, Gordon arrives at the hospital to find Hank wrapped in plastic sheeting in one of the rooms. The lobotomy pick is still protruding in his eye. Gordon is then confronted by Phil, who repeatedly tells him to wake up before vanishing in front of him. So this is when Gordon shows up and everything starts coming to light. And then he starts suspecting Phil of murdering Hank and possibly doing other things around the asylum. Craig now shows up. Remember this guy Craig? He now shows up for work. He comes in, he witnesses Gordon standing over Hank, who is barely alive. Gordon then attacks Craig before pulling a lobotomy pick from Hank's eye and stabbing it into Craig's. Gordon, who is now in a disassociated state, finds the bodies of each of the members in various rooms in a hospital. And this is where I say go back to that scene where he was watching the chair and he heard that voice. The entire time that voice was hypnotizing him. He was under a possessed spell. It was very psychological. He heard voices, they got into his head. And now this is where everything comes into play. This is where everything comes full circle. Very psychological. He now recounts murdering every person, including Phil. So within the last 10-15 minutes of the movie, he's sitting there contemplating. He's sitting there thinking that Phil is the one that did everything when Phil was the one trying to help him. Phil was the one trying to warn him about things that were going on. But he ended up killing Phil. Then, this is another big twister right here. He then recalls killing his wife Wendy, his daughter, and the dog after Wendy spilled the boiling water on him. So the scene that you see him where he visits his wife the very first time, that is after he hears that voice. And you hear the voice tell him, do it. Kill him. So after the big twist at the end, he was distraught. He confusedly attempts to call home to apologize to Wendy. But you notice the phone that he uses as his cell phone, it's all broken up. Everything is in his head. An excerpt from the 9th session plays. Mary's doctor asks her, "Where do you live, Simon?" And to which Simon responds, "I live in the weak and the wounded, doctor." I live in the weak and the wounded. This was a very interesting movie. I didn't feel terrified at all. Like I said, I see movies like this all the time. They don't have that kind of effect on me, really. Anything that usually has some kind of effect, it's usually like jump scares, you know, because you don't expect that shit. But a good, solid movie, you know, when it has something terrifying in it, kind of like The Conjuring, because I know The Conjuring is based on an actual true story, but the way the movie is set up is genius. This movie right here could almost pass for, I don't know, a found footage movie like Blair Witch or something. But the movie, it has an interesting instinct to it. You get to know at least each of the characters. You do follow each of the characters. You know what their backstories are. And you almost want to feel for some of them, or you don't want to feel for them at all, but you know who the characters are. The movie does take off a little slow at the beginning, but once it starts picking up the pace, things start happening, things start getting very psychological, and then you get to the end, you got that big twist. You got that big twist throughout the movie. And then it shows everything going back full circle, right back to the beginning. That hallway scene with that character Gordon. When he first hears that voice. That's what it got into his head. That's what everything started to play out. So while you, the viewer, are watching, and you're thinking, holy shit, I'm seeing something crazy going on here. But then, when it reveals that it was this one character all along, you're like, wait the fuck a minute. Okay, so that does seem very psychological. Okay, and then you get the biggest twist in the end, where he kills his wife, and he kills his infant daughter and their pet dog. Even though everything is off screen, you still hear it. You still hear it. That is the biggest twist right there, and that is where when people watch this movie, that's where they feel, oh my God, this movie fucked me up. That's where you get that feeling of, this movie really fucked me up. So in reviewing this movie for the 2003 edition of the year's Best Fantasy and Horror, Edward Bryant contends that Simon is not necessarily an alternate personality of the former patient Mary, but rather a malevolent genius Loki. He also points out that there's deleted scenes that are included on the DVD of the film that help fill out the narrative. So if you're able to look up on YouTube and find those deleted scenes, I have yet to do that. I didn't even know there was deleted scenes, but it helps fill out the narrative. That's the good thing about deleted scenes when it comes to certain movies. They know how to explain in more detail what's going on in certain scenes, in certain areas of the movie. That's what I like about deleted scenes. Critics have also pointed out similarities and references to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. That is a good comparison, too. The Shining was a definitive film of the 80s. Whether you like it or hate it, I finally watched it for the first time a couple years ago. It's a brilliant movie. It's a brilliant psychological horror, about this man's slow demise into sanity and his attempt to kill his wife, child, and anybody else that gets in his way. So this is a good comparison to this movie, Session 9. Scholar Heike Schwartz states that Session 9 refers to DID as dissociated identity disorder and a possible possession with a demonic personality. M. Scott Peck also saw evil originating from weakness or cowardice. But they do say when it comes to possession, as the movie states at the end, those who are weak or very at their weakest are easily possessed. If you don't have a strong belief in religion, if you don't have a strong belief in anything, if you're not strong enough, if you are weak, if you are open, you are the easiest for any kind of malevolent force, spirit, whatever, to possess. That is what's stated in a lot of different movies that involve possession, paranormal activities, anything like that of that nature. But as I said, this movie, it premiered at the Fantasia Festival in 2001 in July. It was released in theaters August 10th, played on 30 screens. It was released just over 22 years ago. Okay, yeah, just over 22 years ago. That's a long time. It's ended its theatrical run on October 18th, grossing over $378,000. The movie was a greater financial success abroad, earning $1.2 million internationally. As I said, the film's approval rating is now 66% on Rotten Tomatoes. The site's consensus states relying more on atmosphere than gore. Session 9 is effectively creepy. Some critics have praised the film's dark, eerie atmosphere and lack of gore. Entertainment Weekly called the film a marvel of a nightmare atmosphere. Rolling Stone called it a spine tingler and praised Brad Anderson's direction. Los Angeles Times said of the film, Session 9 is so effective that its sense of uncertainty lingers long after the theater lights have gone up. Bloody Disgusting ranked the film fifth in its list of the top 20 best horror films of the 2000s, writing that Session 9 isn't just a cheap hack and slash and instantly forgettable type of horror, but a psychologically probing, deeply unsettling journey off the edge and into the abyss of the human mind. So if you are into movies that are very psychological like this, psychological thrillers, they seem to pack the most punch when it comes to the horror genre. It's not a monster movie like Frankenstein or The Wolfman. It's not a hack and slash movie like Friday the 13th or Halloween. It's not a spirit movie like Paranormal Activity or Poltergeist. Psychological horror movies, what makes them more terrifying when you look at it is that there are actual people out there among us, past, present, and even future possibly, who have very psychological mental disorders. And these things do happen. Even though this movie is pure fiction with the story, these things have happened. There are abandoned mental hospitals out there. The people that were once housed in them have had very dark pasts. They had a very dark history to them. Even the hospitals themselves, to say. A lot of these hospitals, they tortured their patients. Electroshock therapy, waterboarding, whatever. They tortured their patients. To the point where they're like, you don't see this person anymore, do you? You don't hear this person anymore, do you? So these things do happen. That is the most terrifying aspect when you go into a movie like this. That this type of thing, it happens. It's very real. I look at this film as, okay, it's a movie that I watched once. Would I watch it again? I probably will. I most likely will. Would I recommend this movie to anybody? I definitely did. I recommended it to a buddy of mine. Shout out to the Jeff Hagee Show on twitch.tv/the Jeff Hagee Show. My buddy who runs that podcast right there. I told him about the movie. He's usually into these kind of things. So this movie being not really a haunted house movie, but it's very psychological. What's deep in the mind? What makes a man snap? And it's a mystery movie at that. Things start going on. You don't know who's responsible. You don't know what's going on. You don't know there's a lot of things that are going on in this picture. And there's a lot of questions that you ask. You're like, okay, well, who are these two people I saw in the movie? You know, they end up getting described at one point. Okay, well, what happened here? What happened there? There's a lot of questions that are asked throughout the movie, and it all gets revealed in the end. One big twist. And if that big twist is not enough, you got another twist that goes along with it. And it's really heartbreaking, too. Now, should a horror movie like this rely much on blood and gore? No. I feel a movie like this, if it is as terrifying as people see it as, you don't need a whole lot of blood and gore to enjoy a movie. That is proven with a lot of movies that I've watched that were really good or really bad or whatever. Some movies I have enjoyed. This movie does not rely on blood and gore. It relies on atmosphere. It relies on setting. It relies on the mood. It relies on the character development. It relies on the plot. And like I said, you got the subplot where you got the one character who's learning about a mental patient through pre-recordings until he gets to the last recording. And then everything comes into play. Everything is like a roller coaster that slowly ascends, and you're up for that ride, and then when it hits the top and it starts going down, that's when things get really intense. That's when you start enjoying it more. This movie, I wouldn't quite say it's like a roller coaster, but that's how I'm describing it. The first half of the movie, it's like, yeah, you're ascending that roller coaster. You know something's getting ready to happen. Something big's going to happen. It's going to be a big payoff in the end. And then when you get to the top and you start going down, that's how this movie feels. It may not feel like a roller coaster to you or me, but that's how I'm describing it. Session 9, that's how I feel about the movie. I personally would give it a 6 out of 10. Maybe close to a 7. It was an enjoyable movie. It's probably something I won't rewatch over and over again, maybe 2 more times. But it's definitely something to talk about. It's definitely something to check out. I definitely recommend it. You guys who watch it, you may have a different opinion on it. You may not like it, or you may love it. You may say, hey, you're wrong about the movie. Everybody has an opinion about movies. Everybody has a different opinion or a different outlook on them. Session 9, it was definitely a good watch. Will I watch it again? Maybe once or twice. Let us know what you think. Have you seen the movie Session 9 yet? Or do you plan on going into it? Let us know down in the comments. What are your favorite parts of the movie? What did you think about the movie? What's your opinion? What's your grading on it? Let us know. And now that brings us to the end of today's first episode of Cinemacast. Hope I didn't bore you guys too much. Sorry for the way I'm talking. I'm suffering from a cold. The seasons are changing. The weather's getting... It's back and forth with the weather, so it's like I'm stuffy. I'm trying to breathe through my mouth and talk at the same time. Everything's going on at once. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first episode of Cinemacast, our new pre-recorded podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below on our YouTube channel. If you want to catch our live podcasts of Tune In Live and The Other Side when it comes back, hop on over to our Twitch page, twitch.tv/AaronWithAName. Follow us over there. Also, our live streams will be over here as well on our YouTube channel. If you want updates on when these podcasts are going to be live, whether it's video uploads, game streams, podcasts, etc., if you're on Twitter or X as they call it now, follow us over there at Big Mike C AWAN. We are also on Discord, so if you're on Discord and you want to follow our server over there, links are down below in the description section. Click the link today, join us there, get updates and more on future video uploads, future streams, all that good stuff. Once again, thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.